Have you ever been to a Nordic country? Well, I sure have, to all of them. Hi guys, what's up? My name is David and welcome back to my channel. If you've been watching my videos from January to June, then you would know I used to sit behind a different background because I was on exchange at Stockholm University in Sweden. But Sweden is not the only Nordic country that I have visited this year because in 2024, I have visited every single territory that has the status of a country and is in the Nordic region. So I want to talk about that. And this is not just gonna be a travel vlog, me telling you about the stuff that I've seen and visited. I also want to focus on what the Nordic region actually is, which countries are considered to be Nordic and which aren't, and why. And also put an emphasis on the term country, which of these territories actually have the status of a country and which don't, and why don't they? So, for context, I am a student of Scandinavian studies at the University of Amsterdam, and stuff like this is, well, the core of what I do in my studies. So, let's just start by explaining some terms. When I say Nordic, it's not the same as Scandinavian, although it is linked. When we talk about Scandinavia, there's multiple definitions we can use. I have talked about this in another video, but basically, the most common definition of Scandinavia is Sweden, Norway, and Denmark because they are both culturally, linguistically, and geographically connected. Although the Scandinavian peninsula is only Sweden and Norway, so should Denmark count? And then there's people who believe that Finland should be added to Scandinavia. Finland has a different language that is not even an Indo-European language, but it has been linked to Sweden because of expansion politics and it used to be part of Sweden. And then there's also the question of should Iceland be included in Scandinavia because it technically also falls under, the same language and culture as Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. But yeah, that's why I decided to use the term Nordic, which is a bit wider, and generally it encompasses Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, and then also the Faroe Islands and Greenland. But here's where the term country comes into place, because the Faroe Islands and Greenland are not countries. They are independent territories under the Kingdom of Denmark, which is a very postmodern way of saying technically not colonies anymore, but actually still under post-colonial power dynamics. But the Faroe Islands and Greenland do have a higher level of autonomy now than they used to have a few decades ago. So that's great. But since I have not been to Greenland and the Faroe Islands, I will not be including them in my Nordic countries tour because, one, I have not been there, and two, they are not countries yet. So where I have been to is Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, and Iceland, for which I am very thankful that I have the opportunity and the means to go there. And for context, for now, I am based in the Netherlands, so it's not really that far. And as I said, I was on exchange in Sweden, so from Sweden I could easily travel to Finland. And to get to Sweden, I had to go through Denmark, and then I was at the festival in Norway. And then 3 weeks ago, I went to visit someone on Iceland. So, yeah. And there's a lot of questions that people might have regarding actually going to these countries, because I feel like in media and like tourist organization ads, they are very idealized. And sometimes this results in people having like a weird awareness of the fact that their view of these Nordic countries is probably idealized, which makes them actually think less of these countries than they would do. I know this is confusing, but let me explain. So before I went to Sweden on exchange, I was told about a lot of like stereotypes about Sweden. But the idea of telling people about stereotypes is like, okay, this is what people say, but it's actually not true. But what I have realized after living in Sweden is that a lot of these ideas that people have about Sweden are not incorrect, at least from what I have experienced. For example, people talk about this like beautiful nature stuff, but because it's elevated to this almost mystical, magical degree, it just almost sounds fake. But I have experienced Swedish, Norwegian, Finnish, and Icelandic nature, and it is magical. It is mind-blowingly beautiful. So while I wouldn't want to give anyone a sort of too positive idea of how these places look, it is still beautiful. And while obviously tourist companies are only showing the best parts that would attract people to these places, but these places still exist. Like, I have seen beautiful places all around the Nordic territory. And then there are obviously a lot of stereotypes about the people that live there, and honestly, a lot of these, at least on a general level, are also pretty accurate when it comes to certain social norms that exist within some of these countries. That it is what I have experienced as an outsider, but also as someone who knows about the culture because of my studies. So I have made a video about and things about Sweden when I was living there, so I would recommend watching that one. But when it comes to the other countries, yeah, I mean, maybe it's because I just knew about them before I went there, is that I didn't really have any unrealistic expectations, so I guess my ideas about these countries were politically correct in a way. For example, when I went to Iceland last month, I didn't really have any expectations, honestly. I was like, sure, because again, I didn't really go there for tourist reasons per se, just to visit someone, but I had never been there before, and I actually like enjoyed it so much more than I anticipated, because I was like, yeah, sure, Iceland, cool. I mean, it's like in the middle of nowhere. So obviously how you experience your stay in a country depends on why you go there and with whom you go and for how long you go. There are so many aspects of the Nordic countries to see. Like, if you go to Iceland to only visit Reykjavik, for example, you will see a very different Iceland than if you go on a like hike or tour along the ring road, or I don't know, like whatever it is people go to Iceland for. And all this is possible, all this is part of this country. And what I'm trying to say is, I feel there's like this demystification of tourism, that people assume that everything that is ever shown on social media and online is fake or untrue. And while it's definitely true that some things are incorrect or blown out of proportions to make them seem better than they actually are, but some aspects of this marketing are still based on accurate depictions of the country. So the only thing I can say about that is that you just need to do your research before you visit a country and not just blindly believe what a tourist site or company tells you. But it also doesn't mean that you should just disregard everything that others tell you, because there is probably some truth to that. So you might be wondering what I have learned from traveling to all these countries as a student of Scandinavian studies. Well, while I have been to all the countries this year, because it so happened, I have been to Sweden, Norway, and Denmark before, so it's not a new thing for me per se, but I haven't been to Finland and Iceland before, so that was a new experience. And since these two countries are the sort of like liminal areas of the Nordic region, so it was interesting to see these two countries and compare them to what I knew from the typically Scandinavian countries. And it was definitely interesting to go to Finland because I do not speak Finnish. I mean, I have completed the entire Finnish on Duolingo, but Duolingo does not teach you a language. It teaches you random words that are completely unnecessary. And in a language like Finnish, which has 15 grammatical cases, it does not teach you grammar very well. But on the other hand, Swedish is also an official language in Finland, and I do speak Swedish, so that's also these weird post-colonial aspects that you get then, like, as an outsider, but I do speak the language of the people who occupied you for a while, so hi. And well, it was definitely interesting to actually live in Sweden after 2 years of studying Swedish language and culture and history at university and just in my free time, and to see if the things that I've learned actually had some value in the actual Swedish society. And I definitely think that I was prepared very well for my stay there, and I didn't really experience any culture shocks or anything. I think that, yeah, in general, as someone who has lived in multiple countries, I was prepared enough to live in a country like Sweden, especially since I live in the Netherlands right now, and it also has a welfare state kind of situation, so it's really not that different from Sweden when it comes to political and societal norms. But again, the nature is definitely different because the Netherlands does not have mountains and does not have that much of a forested area, and I love mountains and forests. So, that's why I love Sweden and Norway and Finland. And then Norway obviously is linked for me to this festival that I go to every year, which is called Midgardsblot. And the first time I went there, I was like amazed by it. And every year I return to this festival, which is a Viking themed festival, with more knowledge about not only the Viking Age, but also the way in which history, and especially Viking Age history, is used and presented in Scandinavia. So even with that meta commentary in my head, I still find it very interesting to go there and see it, and it doesn't take the fun away. I think it actually adds to the fun because I understand what happens better. So again, that is very fun for me personally. And also, again, Norway, as all the other countries, has so much to offer, from nature and this whole outdoorsy camping, hiking idea that you get from tourist companies that advertise Norway. It's accurate, I would say, looking at the places that I have been to, but it also has a very fun history. Interesting history, and I always go to stuff like national museums to see what the country wants visitors to know about their country. And the thing with national museums is that they generally offer a slightly different description of artifacts in their native language versus in English, which is also fun if you do speak the language to compare. Like, for example, when I was in Iceland and I went to the settlement exhibition, which is an exhibition about the first settlers, Viking Age settlers of Iceland, and there was generally a lot more information in Icelandic than it was in English. And I would not say of myself that I speak Icelandic, but since it is a Scandinavian language and I do speak Swedish, Norwegian, and Danish, I do understand written Icelandic pretty well. So it is interesting to see how a country wants to present itself for native speakers versus for outsiders. And that is definitely a thing in these Nordic countries. I feel they actually only fairly recently entered a more international sphere, because they used to be pretty poor until last century, and it's all very new. Even though now they're seen as these multicultural states, they are still also very traditional and nationalistic on the other hand, and I think that's good to keep in mind. Obviously, my view as someone who has genuinely been interested in Scandinavia and the whole Nordic region all my life, I do realize that I am very biased towards these countries. But again, I have had hours upon hours of lectures and reading time on how these countries work, how they look like, how they want people to look at them. So even with all this seemingly objective commentary that I have gotten, I still have enjoyed my stay in every single one of these countries. I loved seeing the capital cities. I loved seeing the regions outside of the capital cities, because obviously they are very different. And I would definitely recommend everyone to go visit Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, Iceland, and probably also Greenland and the Faroe Islands, because I still want to. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this little travel blog slash societal commentary of mine. And let me know what you think about it. Have you ever been to any of these countries? Did you like it? What did you like about it? And yeah, thank you for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye bye.